Henry Miller once wrote, "An ordinary man is involved in action. The hero acts, an immense difference." Our next speaker has been a hero on both sides of the war on drugs. For 33 years, Neill Franklin served on the Maryland State Police Department, where he led multi-jurisdictional anti-narcotics task forces and ran training for the Baltimore Police Department. After seeing several of his law enforcement friends killed in the line of duty while enforcing drug policies, Neill knew that he needed to work to change these laws that cause so much harm but do nothing to reduce drug use. Since his realization about the failed policies of the drug war, Neill has become a member of LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, where he is now the executive director. Neill has crusaded for the end of prohibition for all drugs, citing how the harms of prohibition far outweigh the consequences of drug use. I first met Neill at the Peace Caravan in Atlanta a couple years ago. I was surprised at how welcoming and open Neill was. I asked him how he got involved with LEAP, and he told me a story of his partner being shot and killed in a failed drug buy. I watched his face as he told me about losing his dear friend and partner, and became mesmerized by the fact that a former cop would speak out so vigorously about putting an end to the prohibition of drugs. From countless interviews with countless marijuana activists and advocates, anytime Neill's name is mentioned, there is a sense that he has become the face that could change the minds of the nation on drug policies. Howard Woolridge, a founding member of LEAP and current marijuana law reform lobbyist, said, "If we could have more Neill Franklins in the fight for marijuana and drug policy reform, this would be a short battle." Neill Franklin was a hero in protecting our communities for 33 years. Now he is a hero in speaking out about the harms of prohibition. He is a hero through his humanity. It is my honor and great pleasure to introduce Neill Franklin.
Oh, you guys are great. I haven't even said a word.
You said plenty over the last few years. Thank you so much.
Wow. Love you guys too. You know, first of all, I appreciate the welcome here. I appreciate you inviting me down here to wonderful Highland. I'm tired of the Northeast and the cold and the snow. And it's just a pleasure to be here in some warm weather with some warm people. You know, there's a lot to be said about the hospitality of the South. You know, there's a lot of truth to that, so thank you very much. Sometimes when I speak, I forget to do some things. Because I'm thinking so much ahead of what I want to say and all the things that I want to cover. So, made a couple of notes here to make sure that I do what I should do. I think most of you know about the organization that I currently speak for, as Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, as Greg gave the description of. You know, there's thousands of law enforcement professionals, not just here in the States, but around the globe. We have branches in 6 other countries now. We're currently opening up additional branches. We've got a team over in the United Nations right now at the CND, Convention on Narcotic Drugs. They've been over there for a week, pushing an amendment. One of our great speakers, Jim Garrett, drafted an amendment to the United Nations Treaty on Narcotic Drugs, the 3 treaties, beginning in 1961. And basically what that amendment will do, and you can find it on our website, so I suggest you go to leap.cc and take a look at it. But what it will do is allow every country, member state of the United Nations, to formulate their own drug management policy, which will give them the option if they want to keep prohibition, they can, but you know what, if they want to do what we're doing here in Washington State and Colorado, you know, they can do that. And they would have the option to do that. So, LEAP is kind of like spreading its wings a little bit, and we're starting to grow, and we have more law enforcement folks signing on board with us every day. I was looking at the numbers the other day, and they just, every week there's more cops and judges and going to our website and signing on board. And a lot of that is not just about what we're doing, but it's about the message that you are spreading also. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and how well we're doing and some of the things that we need to continue and what I'm seeing. So share, lead with your circles, within your circles of influence, with your friends and your family. You don't have to try to explain to your friends and family about ending drug prohibition from a law enforcement perspective. Let us do it. We've got some great videos that you can just pull up on your smartphone, your tablet, your laptop, and show people. There's a great video of Peter Chris, who's one of the co-founders of LEAD. It's about 19 minutes long, and there's also a shorter version that you put out there too, with some words to it. But in those 19 minutes, man, he hits it. He hits every nook and cranny from a law enforcement perspective. And let people like him do that for you. A little bit about me, because another area that I forget to cover is how somebody like me, who was trolling the streets looking for folks like me to arrest. Anyone that had anything to do with illicit drugs. So I assume that people know, which is the wrong thing to do. I assume that people know how I made this transition. Greg touched on it a little bit when he introduced me. But I just want to briefly cover that a little bit more. Yes, I've had over 3 decades in law enforcement. I spent most of that in narcotics enforcement in the state of Maryland. I worked undercover. There's an article in Vice magazine that this wonderful journalist did on me, and I talked extensively about some of the things that I did undercover. And I'm taking a real beating on that in the comment section and on Facebook regarding that from my fellow Maryland State Troopers. But I tell you something, some of those troopers got the crap beat out of them on Facebook by folks like you. Woo! Really did. They started speaking about things that they had absolutely no knowledge of because they stayed within their own little spheres. And they failed to reach out. And they failed to interact with other people. They failed to do research in this area. They just failed to talk about it the way it needs to be talked about. And yeah, they got their butts handed to them. So I thank you for that. So after doing all this work in law enforcement, when I retired from the Maryland State Police in 2000, I went to work for Baltimore. I had become the head of training for Baltimore. And within a few months after my retirement, a good friend of mine, Ed Toadley, he worked undercover for Maryland State Police for many years. And he was working a case with the FBI down in Washington, D.C. Safe Streets campaign. And he was buying cocaine from a mid-level drug dealer. And this drug dealer, this is going to be the final buy of cocaine from this guy. Before we took him down, the FBI had a takedown team in place, and Ed's car was wired with video and sound. And because this involved a little bit more money, a little bit more weight, this guy decided, okay, I'm going to rip Ed totally off. I'm going to rip this drug dealer off. He didn't know this about. I'm going to rip this drug dealer. But the nature of this drug dealing business out in the streets in many of our communities is it's not the average business transaction. When you want to rip off another drug dealer, you have to take some serious and dramatic steps. You have to kill them. Because if you don't, then you're faced with retaliation. Then you're faced with violence. So when the drug dealer came back to the car, Ed's car, Ed was waiting, Just a few moments after that, he just reached over and shot that totally at point blank range inside of the head. So that night, when many of us went to the hospital where Ed was taken, it seems like most of the cops were, there's only one or two ways that you were going to go as a police officer, as a friend of Ed's, as a co-worker. Only one or two ways. Either you're going to go out there and push harder and lock up more people who had anything to do with illicit drugs, and you could hear the conversations. You could hear the conversations days, weeks, months after. But then there was a small group of folks. One who was another good friend of Ed's earlier. Her name is Lee Maddox. She's a captain, retired captain from Maryland State Police, and she's one of our board members. So she was one, and eventually, as the weeks and days go by, we're talking about what's wrong with these pilots. What's wrong here? We're losing people. Initially, we started thinking about the cops that we were losing. But then, as time went on, we started paying more attention to the other people who were being slaughtered. I initially thought about Marcellus Ward, who was a Baltimore City detective who was killed during the time I was working undercover. Just 2 years after Ed was killed, I had 2 Baltimore City police officers gunned down by drug dealers. Well, one gunned down by a drug dealer in the streets of Baltimore, another one had his car ran by a drug dealer who was fleeing the police after he had shot his competition. But then, in 2003 in Baltimore, there was a family of 7, the Dawson family, mother, father, and 5 kids, who lived in a corner row home on Preston Street on the east side. And the mother, Angela, was doing what we want citizens to do, work with us, the police, to get the drug dealers out of your neighborhood. She had a drug dealer and his crew right outside of her house. He was there all the time. And she feared that her boys would be recruited into that business, which is a very deadly business. She didn't really fear that they'd become addicted to drugs. That wasn't her concern. Her concern was them being involved in the game and then being murdered. But she was working with the police, and this drug dealer found out about it. So he felt that he had to send a message. And early one morning, he set their home on fire and killed the entire family. But you can go from city to city to city to city, and you have drive-by shootings and running gun battles. They're war zones. We in the police, we refer to those areas as the front lines. In the trenches. We use that terminology that we use in war. So despite what you hear from the Kevin Sabets of the world and others who are saying from the Office of National Drug Policy, that we don't use that term anymore, drug war. We shouldn't be using that term anymore. Folks, it is a war. It's a war against people. It's what war is about. You have drug dealers fighting drug dealers, you have cops fighting drug dealers. It's a war, and they use guns, they use violence at every turn. The strategies and tactics that we in law enforcement use are those that we use in the military, even the weaponry and the gear. And my county just latched onto a surplus military helicopter. Let's do that. So it is war. And so it was me having that experience that caused me to pause long enough to take a different look at this. And it was just shortly after that I stumbled across Lee's new website back in around 2003 and sent in my email address because I want others to be with me on this. I don't want to be out there by myself. At least you feel secure in numbers. And that's when I started communicating with Jack Cole and some others and started speaking officially for the organization in 2008. Still, while I was a police officer, while I was a commander. And the only reason I gave up law enforcement is to be the director of law enforcement against prohibition. So I wanted to make sure I covered that. So, I've been chastised in the past about not giving that, not covering how I got here. So I want to talk briefly about some things, about what's going on. I want to talk about, and I'm glad that Russ gave this. I mean, this man is a genius with statistics. If you were sitting there and not taking notes, if you didn't copy down his website and the code for downloading it, you need to do it right now. And I'm going to talk about why. But I'm glad that he did that because I don't have to cover statistics. And I can just talk about where we've been, where we are, and from my perspective, what we need to do. Because the fight's not over, folks. We've only just begun. We've only just begun. So, there's been a lot of hard work. There's been a lot of hard work for us to get to where we are now. And it's about collaboration. We really started moving forward on this issue of ending the prohibition of marijuana when we started collaborating at a meaningful level. We all come to this from different places. We all have different perspectives. We all have different wants. But there's one thing that we all want, and that is to end the prohibition of marijuana completely across this country, in every state. And that's what our common goal is, and that's where we need to be pointed and focused, like a laser. The collaborative efforts that we've had in the past to get us here, like for instance, who are some of those organizations? Normal, obviously, a great leader in this, and has been a great leader in this for many, many decades. Marijuana Policy Project, SSDP, LEAP, ASA, DPA, Moms United, ACLU, NAACP now is even on board with this in many states. And there are many, many other organizations. I'd be up here for 2 hours going through all the organizations. But it's the collaborative effort that has got us here. Let's go back and look at 2010 briefly. California, Proposition 19. I don't view that as a failure. Not at all. If there's anyone here who used to be in the military, and if you think back to World War II, a lot of what we did with the offensive was one of the things that you have to do when you're landing on the beach, you have to soften the beach. So your Navy is pounding the beach with shells and artillery to push back the enemy. That's what Proposition 19 was. It started a lot of education on this issue. We started building collaborative efforts. That's when the NAACP came into the effort. That's when it started to become a civil and human rights issue, not just about wanting to smoke marijuana. That's when, from my perspective, that's where the momentum really started picking up. And because we came close, people saw, oh, wait a minute, we can do this. And there was a lot of last-minute efforts there. So people were thinking, what if we plan this out a little bit more? And I'm a firm believer that if we had not done what we did in California in 2010, Colorado would not be where it is today, neither would Washington State, because they would have been the guinea pigs. And they may not have made it without Proposition 19. Momentum is so important, and we can't afford to lose it. We cannot afford to lose it. In whatever you do, whether you're talking about a sporting event, I always like pointing to when the Ravens won the Super Bowl. Okay? And the lights went out, and during halftime, they had momentum during the first half, and things were rolling pretty good, lights went out, and all kinds of problems. Came back in, they lost momentum. And they almost lost Super Bowl. So what do we have to do in order to maintain that momentum? Number one, we have to continue to work just as hard as we have been working. There's no time to relax, take a break. whatever. We have to arm ourselves with information, do those things that we need to do. I'm going to talk about just a couple of things, because what you guys are about, what this is about activism. That word active, you've got to be active. You're active in coming here and participating in this. So what are some of the things that we have to do? Obviously, we have to continue to educate those within our circle, those within our communities. And I touched on that briefly when I began to speak, how we do that. Sharing information, making sure that you have the facts. The facts. Yes, it's emotional too, but you can't dispute the facts. And Russ, again, does a great job with that. I use his facts all the time, and he's got some new ones up here that I'm going to latch into and use. I definitely need them. With what's happening in Colorado and the opposition trying to spin things, that's why we need people like Russ and the information that he gives us. So I refer to that as kind of like working the crowd, working your crowd. But there's something else that we also have to do, because in order to move policy, you've got to move with your legislative bodies. At the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. You've got to do that. You guys have lobby days, right? So you have to participate in that. You might have to give up a day of fun in the sun with the summertime coming, and go visit some legislators. Go hang out at the state capitol for a while. But before you do that, again, you have to arm yourself with the facts. You have to tell your story. You have to tell why you're interested. They do like to hear your personal stories, and then you have to tell them about the facts. And you know what? There's a strategy involved here. There's a strategy involved here. You always have to put your best foot forward. Your best foot forward. So don't show up at your state capitol baked. I'm serious, folks. I've seen people do it. Don't show up high. I hate wearing a suit, but I do it. You got to throw on a tie. If you don't want to cut your hair, at least pull it back, make it look good. I don't have that problem.
Me neither.
Last earlier got my mustache. That was too much trouble too. So I just got rid of it all. There are other reports out there. Russ has great information. There are other reports out there that you should have in your arsenal. The ACLU has put out a great national report that came out in June about marijuana arrests across this country and disparity issues. During a collaborative effort with the ACLU and the NAACP in Maryland, we actually did a report specifically for the state of Maryland, so that we could narrow it down even more, because we're doing a lot of work in Annapolis, our state capital now, during a session. And here's an example of what happens when you do that. Now, the coalition that we established in Maryland, all those groups that I named earlier and more, they're part of that coalition, a smaller coalition to work on one individual state. And here's what we did. Last year, for our tax and regulate bill, we had 4 co-sponsors. 4. This year, 32. 32. We pounded the halls well before the session, during the session, and we let people know that we had a coalition, many groups, legal women voters, you name it. Unions. You know what? Because we're talking about jobs, job creation. People who currently don't work becoming employed. So, again, the coalition building, working the halls of your state capitol, making the phone calls, writing the letters, sending the emails. If you really did the numbers on what it takes to move one of your representatives, the percentage is extremely, extremely low. And if and if you happen to be the one that, during the week before they had to make the vote on a particular piece of legislation, and if you happen to be one of the 20 who called in to say support it, who sent the email to say support it, you know what? Because there's probably not going to be 20 people in opposition. Numbers don't have to be that high. You just got to do it. You just got to be busy and do it. And you'll be surprised what it takes to move one of your policymakers. I'm going to begin to wrap this up talking about, see, I don't talk long. I try not to anymore, at least. My wife tells me different. It's usually the woman in the relationship who talks louder. It's not a sexist remark. The opposition. Right now, and from what I'm seeing and what I saw in Annapolis as we tried to move this legislation in Maryland this year, the strongest opposition by far, there's not many left, is still law enforcement, unfortunately. And just so people know, I haven't become anti-law enforcement. I am very much pro-law enforcement. But I am pro-law enforcement for what it should be, not what it is. Law enforcement should be part of the community, an intricate part of every neighborhood and community on a positive level. Law enforcement should be staffed with people that an average citizen anytime can walk up to, strike up a conversation, get some good information, and get some help when they need it. Duh. So simple. But why isn't law enforcement like that? Why is it that the average child today wants nothing to do with the law enforcement? A law enforcement career, they don't want a law enforcement career, they don't even want to interact with the police. Why is it when I occasionally get pulled over, that what little hair I have stands up on the back of my neck? Shouldn't be that way. I know if it's that way for me, for the average citizen, oh my God, it's got to be horrifying. The average person who is dealing with addiction should be able to walk up to the average police officer on the street and say, Officer so-and-so, you know what? I'm challenged with this addiction and I need some help. That officer should be able to guide that individual as to where they can go, give them some information, maybe a phone number, maybe a contact name. And when that person does go to make that contact, you know what? The money is there for the only man treatment that they need. That's what we should be expecting. One example of what we should be expecting from our law enforcement community. We should be expecting that when a cop does show up for a call for service, and things are a little haywire. Everything from an automobile accident to a serious assault to a rape to a domestic violence incident, that when they show up, calmness shows up. Calm. And people feel the calmness. And they know that things are going to improve, not escalate. So let's talk a little bit about why law enforcement seems to is that barrier for us moving forward with drug policy reform. We talk about three basic things. These are what I see as the three basic things, and I think you need to know this. So when you have those opportunities to interact with law enforcement about this issue, or when you're down in your state capital talking about this issue and law enforcement is part of the conversation. So let me begin with the federal grants. We in law enforcement still receive a lot of federal dollars for drug enforcement. Everything from gang-related drug enforcement to marijuana eradication programs. That's what my sheriff in my county is going to use the helicopter for. Marijuana eradication and whatever. In order to fill out an application and have that application be responsible for you getting more dollars, one of the pieces of criteria that is extremely important are arrests, drug arrests. The quality of that arrest is not important. It's literally a hash mark. Let's talk about close to 700,000 marijuana arrests every year in this country. Those are the easiest arrests for law enforcement to make. Drug-related arrests. Easiest arrest, period. Even including other crimes. So it's a hash mark. Every time we make a marijuana arrest, it's a hash mark. It's a hash mark. It's a hash mark. And we get millions and millions and millions of dollars. When I was the head of human resources for the Baltimore Police Department, I had a team, and their job was to find these federal dollars. They were grant writers. They would tell us what they needed to write the best possible grant. And one of those pieces of criteria is drug arrest. Number two, which also involves money, civil asset forfeit. That's how my sheriff is going to pay for the annual operation of the helicopter. We got it for free, but they're not cheap to operate. So the task force, the drug task force in my county, Harford County, is going to go out there and make arrests and seize money and seize property. You know, when I was the Northeast Regional Commander for the Bureau of Drug and Criminal Enforcement, and this still rings true today, each county, I had 9 at that time, each county had a drug task force. Sheriff's Department, Maryland State Police, local police departments, city cops, prosecutor's office, and maybe even a DEA agent. These different departments, we gave a body. We had we'll give you a body. Okay, here's a body, here's a person to work on that task force. But the operating costs, the daily operating costs, that came from civil asset forfeiture dollars. So in order to keep that task force running, we need to seize your money, your property, your cars. And if you just go on the internet, you can see case after case after case after case of people having their money taken and never even being charged with a crime. Literally, highway robbery. Highway robbery. That's number two. Number three, which it's not tied to money so much, but I believe it is probably the most significant reason that law enforcement is still so much in opposition to this. Think about how long this drug war has been in effect for so long. I mean, what, going on 5 decades, right? We crossed the 4-decade threshold, and now we're pushing on 5 decades. Just about every cop in the business today has been part of that 4-decade-long war on drugs. Drug enforcement today is about 70 to 75% of everything we do in the business. Think about it. You can begin with the number of marijuana arrests that we make all the time. Highway interdiction. If you're in any major city like Atlanta, one of the major priorities in many of our impoverished communities is clear those corners. Clear corners. Get those drug dealers off of the corners. Sting operations. Search warrant after search warrant after search warrant. The violent crime that we had, the shootings, the running gun battles, the drive-by shootings, the murders, if they're not directly from feuding gangs and crews, maybe it's a witness intimidation or shooting. Stop snitching. retaliation, and on and on and on. The Dawson family who was killed, they weren't part of the gang. 7 casualties right there in one night. Some of the vehicles and cars that are stolen to help traffic drugs. You know, you don't want to use your own car, so you steal a car. Swap the tags on it, dump it wherever you want. I mean, crime after crime after crime. What about the people who are addicted to drugs like heroin and meth and cocaine and go out and commit robberies and burglaries and car thefts and on and on and on? 70 to 75% of what we do in law enforcement is somehow tied to this thing of the drug war. Now, after 4 decades, you know what? That's become our identity, folks. That's who we are now. That's what we do. But not just as an industry, not just for a department, but it's an identity for us individually. I think of the most outspoken sheriff in Maryland who has been opposed to what we're trying to do with tax and regulating marijuana in Maryland right now. The most outspoken, he used to be a sergeant with the Maryland State Police. And now he's a sheriff, Sheriff Lewis. You know, in a sense, I don't blame him for this. Because he grew up in this culture as a state trooper on the eastern shore of Maryland, and he quickly became a drug interdiction, highway interdiction expert. So he's out there every day on Route 13, stopping car after car after car. He became an expert at finding hidden compartments for marijuana, for cocaine, for heroin, you name it. He started traveling the country teaching on this topic, award after award after award. It's who he is. He's known across the globe for the work that he's done. And now to come forward, what we're doing is say, you know what? We're taking your identity. What you did for the past 30 years is no longer important anymore. As a matter of fact, you know what? It was probably counterproductive to public safety, and you know what? It probably harmed society more than anything else we do. That's a tough pill to swallow. I still have a bitter taste in my mouth. But I know I have to move forward. So what does that mean? That means we have to communicate. We have to develop. We have to engineer a new identity for our nation's law enforcement community. One of true public safety. One of addressing crimes of violence like murder, rape, domestic violence, crimes against our children. We have to let them know where we want them to be and what they're doing. Exactly how we do that, I'm not really certain yet, but it's going to involve a lot of communication, it's going to involve a lot of work, but that's what we need to do. Because for them, it's like someone coming up to you and saying, we're going to have to change your name. We're going to have to change your identity. We're going to have to move you from here to there. I don't know. It might be okay with some people. But for most, it's not. So, what's next? What's next for us and what we're doing in this wonderful movement that we have? I think we all know. We continue with a laser focus, collaborative